back. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I am intensely excited for today's guest. We have Caralee Frederic. She is a licensed clinical social worker. And so that you know, she is one of the top therapists in the state of Colorado, which was such a great honor that she's willing to come on. Her specialties include the Gottman method, marriage and couples counseling, couples on the brink of counseling, pornography, sexual compulsions and addictions, affair, betrayal, trauma recovery. She's a certified Gottman therapist, trainer, and presenter. She's a certified sexual addiction recovery therapist, a certified discernment counselor, and she has over 20 years of experience. She's also the founder of the Principal Skill Leadership Relationship Center, and the therapists that work in her office are also phenomenal, and she runs the whole center. So, Caralee, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So the topic that we're going to talk about today, my friends, if you have children in the car, you may not want to listen today. It does revolve around them. It's a sensitive topic that we're going to talk about and something you're going to want to talk with your kids about. But if they're in the car with you or if they can hear this podcast, parental advisory recommended. Turn it off, listen later, put in your headphones, listen without them listening, because we are going to be talking about intimacy and talking to kids about sex. Mm-hmm. So that's why I wanted Caralee to come on today, which I know is a very sensitive subject. So I'll give you guys, your moms, a second to put it on pause. Otherwise, let's get started. Caralee, thank you again for coming on.
You're welcome, Janae. Thanks for having me. It's a super important topic and one I've been passionate for a long time in terms of how to talk to our kids and how to be the leaders in teaching our children about sexuality, about their bodies, about intimacy. And frankly, we do a really poor job still to this day. And our parents have and our grandparents have done a poor job. And so we're all just kind of learning from the ground up together.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I know you've done this particular presentation several times with lots of churches and different other organizations and groups to teach parents that. So I appreciate you coming today. And I've heard all of this, which is why I wanted Caralee to come on and talk about it. So let's just dive in.
Okay. Well, as you said, one of my specialties is couples work, and then especially couples dealing with betrayal trauma from sexual acting out, whether that's infidelity, affairs, pornography use, and everything else, that goes along with that. I have this little poem/story, if you will, that I think just really illustrates what we're doing here. And it's called The Fence or the Ambulance. Some of you may have heard it before, but I think it really captures what I'm trying to say here with this. It's by Joseph Malines, and it says, "'Twas a dangerous cliff, as they freely confessed, though to walk near its crest was so pleasant. But over its terrible edge there had slipped a duke and many a peasant. So the people said something would have to be done, but their projects did not at all tally. Some said put a fence around the edge of the cliff, some an ambulance down in the valley. Then an old man remarked, 'It's a marvel to me that people give far more attention to repairing results than to stopping the cause, when they'd much better aim at prevention. Let us stop at its source all this mischief,' cried he. 'Come, neighbors and friends, let us rally. If the cliff we will fence, we might almost dispense with the ambulance down in the valley. To rescue the fallen is good, but 'tis best to prevent other people from falling. Better close up the source of temptation and crime than deliver from dungeon and galley. Better put a strong fence round the top of the cliff than an ambulance down in the valley.'"
Love that.
And what I'm dealing with in my practice are all the broken corpses at the bottom of the cliff. Because we don't have a fence at the top. And the fence at the top is really us as parents teaching our children accurate, scientific, spiritually based information about their bodies, about sexuality, and what it's supposed to be. And what happens when we don't teach them is this gap, this vacuum of information that our children developmentally, appropriately at different ages are going to try to fill in. They want to understand life. They want to understand their bodies. They want to understand relationships. They want to understand sex. They want to understand all of that. And if we don't provide the proper, whatever you would deem proper, but whatever the proper information is per your values, and also proper according to, we now have really good science to draw on, then they will fill it with pornography. Pornography is the number one sex educator in the world of sex.
Wow.
And it obviously teaches very wrong and distorted messages. And I'm not just saying that from a moralistic point of view, but from a scientific point of view as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, I'm really passionate about this. My goal with this presentation, this is actually a 3-hour presentation, which we won't have time for all of it, but my goal is to shed some light on the information that we parents must be teaching our children in order to take back the stage in our own homes in the area of sexuality. And number 2, to provide encouragement to parents to teach line upon line according to your children's needs. This is not a talk. This is not the talk. This is a conversation that must start from the time they're little all the way up into adulthood. And if they're already grown, 7, 12, 15, whatever, it's never too late to start. Okay.
Good.
And then also a goal is to go to battle against the dark forces in the world around us, against pornography, sexual distortions, addictions, and abuse, because they are prevalent and rampant, and it's frankly really discouraging at the bottom of the cliff. So
Yeah. And you see this every day.
I do.
So,
Yeah, I do.
yeah.
We often think, like I said, about the talk. When did you have the talk with your parents about sex? And it's actually, I love asking that question of my adult clients because their stories range, but really the talk is really poorly done. It's either a book, if you're lucky, a book was handed to you. If you're not lucky, then nothing was ever said, or you only got what was taught in schools in 5th grade. And literally every adult I talk to says, I didn't really understand it. I had
Yeah.
no idea what they were trying to teach me. I remember little swimming things and eggs. That's all. That's all I remember. And that does nothing to teach kids about sexuality or about their bodies. And so I have this quote by Neil A. Maxwell who says, remember, we worship a Lord who teaches us precept by precept. So even when we are teaching our children, we should not dump the whole load of hay on them.
Hmm.
So think about that.
Yeah.
How are you planning on teaching your kids? At what age were you thinking you'd start talking to them? A lot of parents think, well, maybe around 8, maybe around 5th grade when they do the talk in school, maybe when they're 12, maybe never, maybe on their wedding day, so those are all bad ideas. But
Well, and I think it's interesting because I remember with my oldest son, the plan was when he turned 11, 12, we would talk to him about sex. But at the age of 8, he came home from school, and a boy on the playground who was in 5th grade had seen his father's screen that had pornography on it and shared everything that he saw, and it was hardcore porn. And he came home sobbing, and I was like, oh, and now this is the world that we're in, that I have
right,
to talk to an 8-year-old about all these things.
right.
So
So I have 3 boys. They're all grown now, 19 and up, right? But because I'm in this field, I knew by the time they went to kindergarten, they would be exposed to something.
wow.
And so now you think about it, 2-year-olds have phones in their hands.
Yeah.
So of course 5-year-olds do. Of course 8-year-olds do. And we cannot control what they're exposed to. We can't. So we have to be the first line of story. Journalism, whoever gets the story first has the most power because they set the tone. They tell the story. It's the same with us and our kids. We need to set the tone. We need to be the first story that they hear. And then everything else that they hear bounces up against that first story.
Yeah.
You don't want your kid to be exposed to something at school as their first story because now you as a parent are bouncing up against that first story and you're at a disadvantage. So who needs to be teaching? We do, the parents. And honestly, okay, I'm a social worker, Janae. In the field of social worker, the prevailing mentality is there are no healthy families, there are no healthy parents. So we need to educate children through the government, through the school first, according to our agenda. That is what we're up against.
Which is sick. Like, it's sick and terrifying because I don't want to co-parent with the government. They don't do good at anything that they put
No,
forth.
they don't.
Nothing.
They don't. But unfortunately, the reality is they can draw from a lot of evidence showing that children are not being taught at home.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not wrong. And so that buttresses their argument, right? All right. So parents are the who, the why. If you're not the ones teaching them, the world will be teaching them. If you're not the first story, the world will be the first story, whatever that looks like. A movie, a TV show, their friends, pornography, Whatever they bump up against first will become the first story.
Yeah. The
And that
Disney
has,
Channel. Yeah.
yeah, the Disney Channel. Exactly. Um,
Which we got rid of, by the way. Just
Good
saying.
for you. Good for
Thank
you.
you.
So how do we do this? My whole presentation is called Line Upon Line, and that really is the paradigm that I would encourage parents to think of when you're teaching your child. You're teaching them up at their age level, at their developmental level, line upon line. That's why we have to start when they're very young. Um, if you as a parent are not comfortable with words like penis and vagina and clitoris, well, when they're infants, they don't know what you're saying. So start practicing.
Yeah.
Start
Well,
practicing.
I think I remember my sister many years ago when I first gave birth to my first child, and she said use anatomically correct terms,
Right.
because if heaven forbid something were to happen to them and they are molested, and you taught them to call it a cookie,
Mm-hmm.
and you say they touched my cookie, like that doesn't help police, it doesn't help the hospital. They need to know like what it is
Right.
that you're talking about anyway. And so
Right.
that always stuck with me. And it was embarrassing in the grocery store with my daughter, because she was like,
Yeah.
Mom, my vagina's so itchy right now. And I'm like, and she's just
Yes.
yelling it and everyone's looking, but I'm like, well, she knows what it is.
Yes, she
So
does. And you have a great story out of that. So
right.
no, it is really important. And one of the terms that I didn't even know this till the last couple of years, adults and even teenagers, they use the word vagina for all of the female anatomy.
Hmm.
So it's a
That makes
vulva.
sense.
Vulva is a proper word for all the female sexual anatomy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Genitalia. And so imagine if your 17, 15, 16-year-old son says, yeah, I touched her vagina. He's going to be prosecuted as a sex offender because the vagina is up inside of a girl. When
Mm-hmm.
really what he meant is he maybe, fondled her around her vulva or something when they were dating. So big difference. Is it okay? No, but terminology matters.
Yeah.
Accuracy matters, right? And we live in a world where sex offenders are real and young sex offenders get prosecuted.
Mm-hmm.
So it's for their safety and their protection to teach them the proper anatomically correct terms and for us to know it as well. So how else do we be successful in teaching our children about anatomy and sex? You have to fill their love bucket at home. You have to have a good relationship with them, or no matter what you say, it won't matter and they won't believe you.
Yeah.
We also need to get comfortable enough with this information for ourselves, with our spouse, and with our children that we can be calm and not reactive or judgmental. So let me tell you a sad little story. It's my own story. When I was 8, 8-year-old girls think the epitome, like the clinching deal of a friendship, is a sleepover, right? Or they used to, anyways, back in the day. And I had a fantastic teacher in the 3rd grade. His name was Mr. Sanchez. And he would tell us all the time about his sweet wife who would bake us bread, and we'd have bread on Fridays, bread with homemade butter. And I just thought he was the coolest teacher ever. And I knew he had grown children because he'd talk about them. I knew he had a wife, but as an 8-year-old little girl, I just adored him. And I remember thinking, we can't have him sleep over at my house because we don't have any extra beds. So I'm just going to ask if I can go to his house for a sleepover, right? Very
Right.
innocent. And so I did. I went up to him. I said, Mr. Sanchez, could I come to your house for a sleepover sometime? And he said, well, I think you should probably ask your mommy about that, right?
Yeah.
Very appropriate answer. So I went home, innocent as the day is long, and told my mom, Mom, I want to have a sleepover at Mr. Sanchez's house. And she went ballistic. And that was my first sex talk because she told me, do you know what men do to little girls who sleep at their homes? And she was yelling and screaming, and I was terrified. And I had no idea what she was talking about.
Yeah.
None. I just thought he was my friend, right? So, and that memory is very clear in my mind to this day. And so we have to be calm. We have to be, non-judgmental, curious. Well, where did this come from? Why would you ask that, right?
Yeah.
Um, Even with things that are really uncomfortable for us. And then with that, the parent-child relationship is more important than any information you share. If you get the information wrong, so what? How's your relationship with that child? Is it warm? It's not going to be perfect, but is it warm? Is it loving? Do they trust you? Um, and make time for your children. They are your masterpiece.
And that's one thing that we talk a lot about on the podcast is like education aside, the most important thing that parents are going to do when they bring their kids home to homeschool is to reestablish the relationship that's been lost and get them parent oriented again, as opposed to peer oriented, as Dr. Gordon Neufeld talks about, that they have to have a strong relationship with them because that's what's going to carry them through
Absolutely.
like long term into adulthood. So
Absolutely. So with that,
I
I
love
have a
that.
great quote by a man named Jeffrey R. Holland. He was quoted in a magazine called Meridian Magazine, and he said, "Without question, one of the best defenses against the dark arts is close family ties.
Hmm.
Parental love, family activity, gentle teaching, and respectful conversation, sweet time together can build bonds that will never be broken."
I love that.
That's the foundation, right? So, how else? How do we prepare ourselves? It's really important as parents to know what our values are around our bodies and around our sexuality and around intimacy and around relationships. If we don't know what our values are, we can't very well pass them on. If you're a faith based person, invite the Spirit of God to help you. God is interested in your children, He's interested in you being a successful parent. um, Gain a conviction of the goodness of sex. Most, maybe all of us have some kind of overlay of shame around sex, just by virtue of the culture we live in, just by virtue of having a lot of mixed messages over the decades and thousands of years prior to us, right? And so, if you don't believe that sex is good and godly and necessary and important and wonderful and playful, then do some education for yourself on that. Okay. Notice and remove any negative beliefs or inhibitions you hold about the body or about sex. Um, Most of us, again, have those. But again, I can't teach my daughter how amazing her cute little body is if I think mine is ugly and fat.
Yeah.
I can't teach my son how amazing it is that one day he'll be a father if I think men are gross and their bodies are
Yeah.
gross, right?
Yeah.
I can't. So, education of self, and then start having open and healthy discussions about sex with your spouse. If you can't have these conversations with your spouse, you are not going to feel comfortable with your kids, right?
Yeah, that would be terrible.
Yes. Well, and I just laugh because sex and spirituality are those two topics that we do, but we don't talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And we really need to talk about them.
I love that.
So,
Well, and back
um,
to the
yeah.
body, like um over the last year I've lost close to 70 pounds, but I've never told like said in front of my kids like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so fat." I have said like I am overweight and my heart is not healthy, my body is
Hmm.
not healthy. I'm beautiful, but all of this isn't healthy and I'm not going to live very long
Hmm.
because I didn't want my girls to equate thin equals beautiful or pretty,
Right.
you know.
Good.
And so that's something that I've been very conscious about with my girls. And so they don't say, "Hey, do I look fat?" They don't. And so I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, I win there. I won one."
Good.
So
Take every win you can.
thank you. I sure will.
Absolutely. What else? Some of these we already mentioned, but um, be truthful and honest with your kids. Use the correct terms. Learn the slang that's out there because that's what they're going to hear out there. You need to know what it is so you can correct it. Dialogue with them. Don't just lecture. Ask
Mhm.
lots of questions. What do you think is great about your body? What do you like about being a boy? What do you like about being a girl? You know, um, what what are the best parts of your body? What are the parts that you are not comfortable with? Do you know
Yeah.
what every body part is for? Like lots of questions and get the dialogue. Again, you're going to have great stories if you do this, you guys, right? Um, and then when you teach your children, teach what to do rather than what not to do. So often we're like, well, don't touch, don't kiss, don't. And that doesn't tell them what to do.
Yeah.
So, sure, you can hug your friend. Sure, you can hold your friend's hand. Sure, when you start dating, try to go out on group dates. They're more fun, anyways, right?
Mhm.
You can do what? and talk to them about that in terms of what to do rather than what not to do. Um,
I
teach
mean, do you approach that subject at all, like along with yes, it's good to hold hands and and here's the line. I mean,
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Here's the line. We need boundaries. We need healthy boundaries. And a boundary defines what is and is not okay. A boundary doesn't define what you can and can't do. It defines what is and is not okay. So what is and is
interesting.
not okay with your body? What is or is not okay in our home? What are our standards? This is okay, this is not. And here's why. Right?
I love
So
that.
yeah, so definitely it's important to have good healthy boundaries and define where those lines are. They won't know naturally. They won't naturally know where the line is.
Mm-mm.
I mean, back in the day, maybe it's still not that different, but girls got pregnant all the time because they didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
They didn't know. Some didn't know when they actually had intercourse because they'd been taught nothing. So they didn't have language for it, right? So, yeah, definitely what to do and where the lines are and what's appropriate for your age and what's not appropriate for your age, all of those things, you know. Um, so some other hows, focus on the good, the blessings of sex and your body, sexuality. Teach by example how to treat the opposite sex. This is a huge problem. How do you treat your spouse? How do you treat your husband, your wife, your mother-in-law, your father-in-law, your boys, your girls? How are you treating them? Are you showing by example how to treat a man, how to treat a woman, how you expect to be treated as a woman or as a man, right? Short, concise information with concrete hands-on illustrations, pictures, props, books. There's lots of cute little books in the library for free, that talk about birds and bees and animals and eventually humans having sex. So all of that is important. And then with your older kids, like the older they get, find an activity that you can do while you're talking. Drive, play ball, go on a walk. Don't expect them to sit there eye to eye with you talking about this. It's too uncomfortable,
I was
right?
gonna say that's really uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah. So go on a walk. Now you're both looking the same direction. You're not looking at each other, but you're still talking. Or go on a drive or play basketball or something, right?
Yeah. I love that.
And then learn to stall respectfully in the conversation. Learn to pause. Learn to wait. Be comfortable with the silence because your children are thinking. They're thinking about what you're saying, and maybe they're overwhelmed, but if you pause and watch, then you can tell the difference. I've been paying attention a lot to that. I'm doing some somatic work and mindfulness work and meditation work lately, and most of the things I listen to, podcasts and that kind of thing, they move way too fast for me. I'm like, whoa, wait, I haven't even done the first thing you said. Hold on, And I think sometimes we're like that with our kids. Our own anxiety ramps us up, and we talk way too much and way too fast, and we really need to slow it down and pause and check in. What do you think? How do you feel about what I just said? Does that make sense? Do you have any questions? Pause, pause, pause. Okay.
Is it okay to come back to the conversation and be like, do you want to revisit this when you have more questions? Or,
For
hey,
sure.
if questions pop up, I'm here and I'm not going to judge you and nothing's off limits. I mean, is that
Yes,
something that we can do as parents?
for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, give that permission, put it out there. This is an open door topic. Obviously, we prefer you don't open the door when we have guests in the
Yes,
home,
right.
but we're
When
not
everyone's over
educating
for
the whole
Sunday
world.
dinner.
Yeah. We're just educating our family, not the whole world. But yeah,
Right.
it's an open door. Anytime you have a question, come talk to me. Um, and be willing to say, you know what, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. Let's go find out. I'll go find out and share what I find out with you. Or if they're old enough, what are some safe ways you can go find out the answer to your question, right? Um, and then use stories, use news, especially the older they get. Use stories, use news articles, I heard somebody say, I was on a walk with my friend and we were talking about. These are better ways to segue into a conversation rather than just, bold faced jump on them with your thoughts, So
Well, and back to the when you said to stay calm, I'm very grateful because my mother was very she was very good about talking to us and pretty young about everything. But I remember I was a sophomore in high school and I heard the term orgasm. And so I went home and I will never forget. She's sitting there stirring spaghetti
Yeah.
and I was like, "Mom, what's an orgasm?" I heard this term at school and she didn't miss a beat. You know, she kept stirring the spaghetti. She didn't yell. She just explained it. She's like, "This is what it is."
Yeah.
And I was so grateful that she wasn't like, oh, "Where did you, you know, like it
Yeah.
didn't mortify me. She just explained what it was. I'm like, "Huh. Okay." And she's like, "They're wonderful." So that you know, and just, you know, and can you go set the table? You
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
and but
Wonderful.
I
Yeah.
will never forget how she didn't make me feel stupid or dumb, and yet she left that door open for me to talk to
Right.
her openly about that.
Oh, that's great. I
So
love that. That again, how she said it more important than even what she said, right? And then if you haven't, if you're like just starting out, like, oh my gosh, they're 12 or they're 15, we've never talked about this. Okay, better late than never.
yeah.
And be willing to apologize to your children for being too relaxed or too nervous about this topic to have started earlier. And then announce your intention to catch up. So we're going to have a few more conversations than we would have if we'd started when you were 2, right? So we're going to make this intentional. We're going to start now. Um, so that's a little bit about who and why. Um, so when and what. So when you have already started, again, how you treat men, how you treat women, how you treat boys, how you treat girls, you've already started. You've already started with your reactions to bodily functions. You've already started with your reactions to taking care of their little bodies when they were young and how you've taught them to take care of their own body, right? Um, You've already started with how you communicate about all topics. Okay, so all this is foundational for how do I talk to my kid about sex or how do I talk to my kid about their bodies? You've already started. So just keep that in mind. You've already started. Okay. Success with easier topics obviously paves the way for the harder ones. Okay. Be preemptive and proactive, meaning don't wait for your child to come home with a question for your first conversation. You take the bull by the horns, right? And you start it. And then we already talked about some of this. Let's see. I like this quote too. It says, ideally, you should use the first 8 to 12 years of a child's life to prepare them for their teenage years. If you wait until adolescence to teach your children about the changes of puberty and about intimate relationships, you may not be able to influence them as easily. So again, if your kids are already teenagers, great, start now because you're
Yeah.
doing more than their friends are doing. So I have this slide. I wish you guys could see it. It's cute. It's got all these kids in leotards. They're all jumping up in the air. And the quote says, the body is good and is a gift from God. Um, and I remember wanting to teach my kids when they were little some of these concepts. And I thought I'd go through 4 or 5 of these slides, right? And we got to this slide and I said just that quote. And my cute little 7-year-old said, well, except for the bad parts. And I was like, oh, what are the bad parts? And so that was our whole conversation, right? We had never taught them they had bad parts, but he had just kind of formulated that in his mind. There are bad parts of the body. And
Interesting.
so we had this 40-minute conversation that was going to run through 5 slides on one slide, right? And talking
Hmm.
about how there are no bad parts. All parts are good. All parts come from God. All parts are needed and useful and beautiful and functional, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, again, think about your value system in terms of the body and your value system in terms of sexuality. And that's what you're going to be teaching. You want to teach children to have respect for the body and all its functions. We talked a minute ago about boundaries that no means no and stop means stop. End of story. There's no explanation, there's no negotiating, nothing. And so we again have to role model that to our children. I have a really bad habit of I love to pat my boys' butts. Even though they're like grown now, they go up the stairs and I just want to smack their butt, right? And they don't like it. And
And you're like,
so I know, I'm like, I made that. No,
I made your body. Yeah.
yeah. And so I I have had to learn and still learning, but had to learn, remember your role modeling respect or not. If they don't like it, don't do it. Same thing with tickling. If they don't like it, don't do it. Same thing with hugging and kissing grandma who they only see once a year. If they don't want to do it, don't make them do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Teach them the essentials of procreation. Again, if you don't know, then learn for yourself. Learn the fundamentals. I'm going to do a plug for a book that every single human being should read. Okay. It's called Come As You Are, and it's written by Emily Nagoski. And she is a sex educator at the university level. I can't remember which university. Um, it is the single best book on sexuality. She gears it towards female sexuality, but there's plenty of information that is every bit as applicable to male sexuality as well. And
And I'll put that in the show notes so that they
yeah,
can link to it.
yeah, definitely please do, because honestly, it will make your life easier personally, and it'll make your goal of teaching your children about sex easier as well. Now, fair warning, she does use, I don't know, 4 or 5 couples as examples through the book. She pulls through the book to highlight different concepts. One of the couples is a lesbian couple. I would say if you're uncomfortable with that, take what you can, leave the rest, right? Um, and then we need to teach our children that sex can be controlled. It is not a drive. It's actually not a drive. That's one of the points in her book. It's not a drive.
Interesting.
It's not something that must happen because I have this urge. Sex can be controlled for boys and girls, for men and women. That's a very important concept that very often we don't articulate overtly, and that we're expected to. I mean, think about it. It's not acceptable to walk around and masturbate in public.
Right, right.
So we already are teaching some of that, but we often don't go all the way and teach that just because you have the desire to have sex, that does not mean that you're entitled to have sex with whom, even with your husband or wife. There must be respect. There must be consent. One of the things that is kind of big now that wasn't when I made this presentation is the concept of consent. And the kids are learning it in school. What does consent mean? And so, again, we want to be the ones who talk about consent. There's a really good little animated video, short, whatever you want to call it, called Consent TEA. It's well worth looking up and watching. I think there might be one that has swearing and there might be a clean version. So look for the clean version. But it does a really excellent job of illustrating this concept of consent using the idea of giving your friend some tea, whether they want it or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's related to sexuality. But
And is that on YouTube then?
I'm guessing, yeah, I'm guessing
Okay.
it is.
I'll link that one too. So
Okay, yeah. And then teach them the difference between intimacy versus sex. Okay, sex is a biological act that we do, that we engage in. And sex doesn't just start with intercourse. Sex can be all the things that lead up to that. Intimacy is a word that we use interchangeably with sex, and that's not what it means. The word intimacy means knowledge based on a close personal study of something. Okay. And so there's all kinds of intimacy. There's physical intimacy, like when we're taking care of our babies, but we don't have sex with them. We change their diapers and we feed them, right? There's
right.
emotional intimacy, which is knowing each other at an emotional level, sharing emotions. There's mental intimacy, meaning sharing ideas, right? There's sexual intimacy, of course, sharing sexuality, sharing sexual interactions with each other. There's intergenerational intimacy. So your stories from your family history is a type of intimacy, right? So there's all these different, that's not all of them, but there's all these different kinds of intimacy. And we want to teach our children what it means to be intimate in a relationship. And you can do that by focusing on what's your favorite thing ever? How do you learn about that? Isn't that amazing that you're so curious and you're so interested in learning about something? You now have an intimate knowledge of this topic that I don't
I
have,
love that.
right? So, yeah, so you can use that in a more normalized fashion so they understand the real meaning of the word intimacy.
I love that.
If you have a vision of God's plan for sexuality and the purposes of sex, teach that. I happen to have a philosophy, or not philosophy, but from my own studies, that sex is intended for beyond procreation. It's intended for the creation of love and bonding and marriage and family and closeness and intimacy and all the good things. That's what it's intended for, not just for making babies, right? Making babies is wonderful, but that's not the only thing it's intended for. Um, and let's see. I'm skipping over a whole bunch of really good quotes, but a couple other things of what to teach. So here I'm going to break it down by age levels. Okay. So
Perfect.
0 to 8 years old, again, that parent-child relationship is the number one protection of our children against the outside world, against abuse. So my very first job out of grad school was at an institute called the Giaretto Institute. And we worked with the whole family system where there had been sexual abuse. So the victims, the siblings, the offenders, and the non-offending parent, because the reality is once sex offenders leave jail, they often go home. And I learned from that time in that institute that the number one protection, this is validated by research, the number one protection of a child against future sexual abuse is a close relationship with their non-offending parent.
Wow.
That's it.
Always back to the relationship. Yep.
Always back to the relationship. 0 to 8 years old, you can teach them about safe touch and how to protect against unsafe touch. How to say, don't touch me there. That's my body. Where the bathing suit covers, nobody touches unless you give permission, unless it's an emergency in the hospital with a doctor and with mom or dad there, right? That kind of a thing. You can teach 0 to 8 knowledge of body parts and the correct names. Again, another little funny story. It's my oldest son's 25th birthday, so he'll appreciate this. But when he was in second grade, I got a phone call from his teacher, and she was giggling and laughing, and she said, I hope you can find the humor in this. I was like mortified because he's my oldest, right? I'm like, oh, what did he do? And she said, well, at recess, he decided to teach the entire second grade the anatomically correct terms for their bodies. And I was like, oh, please direct any angry parents to me. I will explain. And she's like, no, I'll handle that. But so then when my son got home, I was like, so, sweetie, tell me what happened at school today. Skipped right over lunch. And I said, tell me what happened at lunch. And he goes, oh, Mom, yes, I told the kids about how babies are made. And I'm like, why would you do that? And he said, in his little innocent 7-year-old self, he said, well, I didn't want them to be shocked when they got married.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Like,
Okay. So yes, he used terms like penis and vagina, and I was mortified, but I was also a little bit proud. And then we had a conversation about, sweetie, this is a parent's job. And I'm so glad that you're so excited and protective of your friends and wanting good things for your friends. And that's wonderful. And you need to know that this is a parent's job for children. And that's why we taught you. And their parents want to teach them. You didn't do anything wrong, but we need to respect boundaries, right? And so, yes, there are risks with teaching them the proper terms, but I think it's
did
okay.
any parents call? Did you hear from anybody?
No, and I don't even think the teacher heard from anybody. But I did hear that as he started his little lecture, lots of little hands went up, and teacher Scott's being inappropriate. So teach them at 0 to 8 what's great about being a boy, what's great about being a girl. Teach them why we wear clothes and why we cover up our bodies. It's not out of shame, it's out of respect, right? And then put it into a context. I love the context. You may not love it, but I love the context of, you are going to grow up to be a mom or a dad one day. You're going to grow up to be a healthy, independent adult who takes care of their own body, right? Whatever context you're going to put it in, help them understand that there's a higher purpose for what you're teaching them.
I love that.
And then be ready to respond to individual differences. And again, add that line upon line. Some of our kids are going to have physical problems or sexual problems, and we need to be ready to respond to that at their level and at their need level as well, right? I think 0 to 8 years old, we can teach what I call first base, so neck and up, right? And what that includes is your brain is beautiful, and the number one sex organ is your brain. And you need to use your brain or lose it. Intelligence is attractive. So if you want to attract good people into your life, use your brain, right? I'm sorry, I'm going to go on my little soapbox. Being in front of video games kills brain cells. So that is not an example of using your brain. So.
Yes, and we just met with a pediatrician a couple months ago for the checkup, and he's like, if I could take screens out of every school, out of every person's hands. I would. And
Yeah.
so, and actually we're on a video game fast currently in the Daniels household because I have a
Nice.
child who wants to just play them all the time.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the whole summer we're
Yeah.
fasting from it
That's
because it does
awesome.
it, like they changes their behavior, it changes the way they think, it change. Yeah,
It
preach to the
does.
choir right here.
It does completely. And we're now seeing what 2015 is when smartphones got into every person's hand. So we're now seeing these children who have grown up with smartphones enter adulthood and they don't know how to do what you and I know how to do. They don't know how to go up and apply for a job beyond fill out a form online. They don't know how to have a conversation. They don't know how to do a lot of basic skills that you and I take for granted. So, so yeah, use your brain, use it or lose it. Our thoughts determine our emotions and behaviors. Now that's very controversial. I put this together some 12 years ago, and I know a little bit more now. But our thoughts are very powerful in dictating, interpreting, and helping us manage our emotions and behaviors. Okay, so if I think negative thoughts, I'm going to have negative feelings. I'm probably going to have negative behaviors, right? And then teach them problem solving phrases such as, what did you see or think when this happened? Or what will you do the next time this happens? So you can do that 0 to 8. They can start learning those skills, right? And then hygiene, you can't wait till they hit puberty. You must teach them hygiene, their hair, their skin, their teeth, their breath, their their sexual parts, right? How do you take care of your body? I'm a little bit of a Nazi on this because I told my boys by the time they hit double digits, you will take a bath every day now. You're double digits, bath every day, because I don't want stinky kids. So,
Yeah. So
you know,
I have to share a story that my mom shared with me, and it hit me as I think I was like 9 when she shared it. She told the story of a lady who went to the doctor, and she's like, I smell all the time, and I clean as high up as possible, and I wash as high down as possible. And he said, but are you washing possible? And she's like, oh, I'm not. And he's like, well, then wash possible. And
nice.
I was like, oh, oh, I need to wash all of me, like.
That's awesome. I love that. Oh, okay. Let's see. Um, this is a little, let's see, before we get to the older kids, this is a little slide I have on accidental exposure, which you were just talking about with your son earlier, right? Again, the risk is very high. And this comes from a book called What's the Big Deal About Pornography, written by Jill Manning. She's a PhD in psychology. She actually has testified before Congress about the harms of pornography. And so she said, in order to prepare for accidental exposure, because it will happen, you need to teach them how to name it. What is it they're seeing? They're seeing pornography. That's not going to mean anything unless you define what that means. So, pornography is sexual slavery. It is dehumanizing, in other words, making people less than, not as important as, not as valuable as others. And it's child abuse. And it's, even if it's an adult, it is abuse because that is God's child.
Yeah.
Okay. There's nothing redeeming in pornography at all. I don't care what the porn industry tries to tell us, literally nothing. You want to teach them to cover their eyes and ears quickly. And you want to teach them to pay attention to that ick feeling inside. And you can teach them the ick feeling in everyday life, right? They have ick feelings for all kinds of things. So teach them to pay attention to that ick feeling. And when they encounter that, to move away or to cover eyes, ears, or move away. It's very important that they learn that, not just for pornography exposure, but just in life in general. And that's even true if they run into a person that gives them that ick feeling. Step away, step back. That is your spirit, that is your intuition trying to protect you. Okay.
Love that.
Teach them to find the light. And this is something you're going to, at 0 to 8 and even older, you're going to have to teach them. Teach them to find the lie in what they're seeing and then find the opposing truth about sexuality. Okay.
Can you give an example?
So it's very common in pornography. Pornography is primarily, and I know people are going to tell me, oh, but it's different now. The main frame of pornography is to teach that men and women are the same and they respond to the same cues in the same way. Okay. If you're a woman, you know that's not true. If you're a man, you know that's not true. And so if they see that, and they may see something that looks very harsh because there's hardly any soft porn out there anymore. If they see something that looks very harsh or very scary, um, then you need to teach them that the truth is that that is scary. The truth is that that is not healthy sexuality. That is not a healthy relationship. The truth is that men and women are different, and that's okay. And that's how God designed us. That's how nature designed us. And the truth is that women need very different things than what men do to have a good sex life and to be aroused and to be interested in sex and all the things, right? So that's just like a really basic but
Mhm.
precise example of what you might learn from pornography that needs to be turned around.
I love that. Well, and I think back to the when 50 Shades of Grey came out,
Mm,
I read a synopsis of it. And I remember thinking, and I didn't read the book because I was kind of disgusted. I'm like, if this guy wasn't a billionaire, he would just be deemed a really creepy, terrible human being that wants to do terrible things to women,
right,
but
right,
because we throw billionaire in, suddenly that makes it okay.
right,
Like what?
right,
What is this teaching women?
right.
So
Yes. I did not read that either because all the reports I heard from people were highly disturbing. So
yeah. 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 Yes.
yes,
Like I said, I didn't read it,
no,
but I read the synopsis and then people told me and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's a hard no.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
So yeah, so be willing to. I mean, that means you're going to have a conversation about the porn they viewed or the porn they were exposed to without reacting, because your goal is to teach the truth, right? Teach goodness. Teach them to tell someone that they trust, hopefully you, the parent, about the exposure as soon as possible. Not to sit on it, not to tuck it away, not to ruminate about it over and over and over in their head, because that is what happens. Sexual images are so impactful that they carve a place in our brain immediately.
wow.
And so we need to teach our children, come talk to me, come talk to me, come talk to someone you trust and love and is safe about what you saw and what you think about it, because we can start to change those neural pathways quickly if we need to, rather than let it be. If you ruminate over it, the neural pathway becomes deeper and stronger. So I've heard stories from many people who their first sexual exposure becomes their template for what they believe sex is going to be like. And again, it's that first story principle, right? Now, pornography is the first story, and everything else you see or hear is going to bump up against that and be weaker. And so we don't want that, and we can turn that around. Teach them to turn to something positive and uplifting and wholesome to refocus their mind and body and spirit if they are accidentally exposed, and teach them to learn from the experience and identify ways that they can avoid this in the future, such as don't look at anybody else's phone. If they're like,
Yeah.
hey, look at this, wait, what are you going to show me? Just role play some different ways that they can protect themselves, you know.
I love that.
Okay, so 8 to 12-year-olds, I would call this second base, teaching them second base, which is neck to genitals, right? So teach them about body types. I loved what you said earlier that, hey, okay, so I've been working on losing weight. That doesn't make me unattractive. I am attractive. I'm beautiful. It just means I'm trying to be healthy. Teach them that every body type is healthy and beautiful and can be. Teach them more on hygiene and the physical changes that they will experience. Teach them that they will be getting hair in different areas.
Mhm.
Teach them they will start to smell in different areas. Teach them what happens with menstruation, right? Don't let the
Mhm.
girls, unfortunately, just flounder around, right? And try to figure it out. Teach them about acne and pimples, and teach the boys about wet dreams and
Mhm.
erections way before it happens, maybe even before they turn 8, because way before it happens. So they're not freaked out by it. They're not automatically shamed because they've been taught not to wet the bed. So if they wake up with a
Right.
wet bed, they're going to believe that they wet the bed and not
Yeah.
understand it, right? So teach them about those things before it happens. Um, Teach them the emotions and attitudes that we are responsible for managing all of this ourselves, because it's my body, it's my stewardship, right? And I will help you. As your parent, I will help you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think I like how you address that it has to be younger. And I was just talking to a mom and she said, my daughter is almost 10 and has already started her period. And
Mm-hmm.
and we're seeing the maturation happening younger and younger and younger,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the antibiotics or whatever.
Right.
And so I think that's really important because there's nothing more mortifying than my poor older sister who started her period in a white dress in 5th grade.
Right.
and she hadn't been taught about, my mom had not talked to her about it yet.
Yeah.
And it was mortifying for her. And I thought, I don't ever want my daughters to go through that.
No.
Be like, what?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
dying.
I'm dying. What happened? Yes, those are mortifying experiences for little girls to have a period and not understand what's happening and to be embarrassed in front of their peers, right? Or in front of their family because they don't know what's happening. So we really do a disservice if we don't teach them ahead of time. And if you only have boys like I do, teach them about menstruation because they have friends that are girls. They're going to be dating girls, hopefully, right? They're going to marry a girl someday. So they need to understand these things.
My One of my children, I will not say which one, said to his sister, are you on your period right now? Because you're super grouchy. And you know what happens when that is said? And I thought, like, pardon my language, I thought all hell was going to break loose. And I was like, don't you ever say to a woman, not your wife, not your sister, not anyone, are you on your period? Not your business.
Right.
And you'll lose your life and your head
Yeah.
like that, like you
Yeah.
just did.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and I said, you have to be respectful and just leave them alone. Anyway,
Right.
it was a hard conversation.
It is a
He
hard
learned the hard way.
conversation. And yet, I mean, I don't think it's just boys or men that do that. I think we as women do that as well. And
Mhm.
again, is there not some education that we could bone up on to educate ourselves about why is it that we're more sensitive when we're in our period or when we're at a certain place in our menstrual cycle? There is. There's very logical explanations for why this happens. And we shouldn't be demeaned for it, you know.
Right.
Um,
I love it.
yeah, so prepare our children for these changes. Teach them that it's a natural and wonderful part of maturing, of God's plan, of the beautiful design, of the wonders of creation, whatever works for you. And then cultivate an attitude of, isn't that interesting? Oh my gosh, mom, I have a pimple. Oh my gosh, isn't that interesting? You've never had one of those before, right? Or, oh my gosh, mom, I'm growing hair. Oh, isn't that interesting? Wow, okay, right? If we cultivate that attitude, what a wonderful experience for our children, as opposed to like, yeah, that happens to everybody, or it's not that big of a deal, or gross, don't tell me about that, right? We want to have a positive interaction with them.
I do have to chuckle. I have one child, and when they were going through the change, he said to me, well, he hadn't started yet. He really wanted to go through puberty, but he hadn't started yet. And he's like, Mom, I think I'm going through puberty. And I'm
Nice.
like, you do? How come? And he's like, I just feel it in my heart. And I'm like, yeah, that's not where you're going to feel it. There will be other signs
Yes.
before you feel it in your heart, like you're going to get hair.
Yeah.
And it was so funny. I'm like, yeah, not in your heart.
Right. Right.
Other areas. You'll feel it in other areas.
That's awesome. I love it. I love it. All right. What else? 8 to 12 years old. When you're uncomfortable, just admit it. Don't try to hide it. Just say, this is uncomfortable, but we still need to talk about it. You might be uncomfortable, but we still need to talk about it, right? Aim for that casual, matter of fact approach. And then insert gentle humor, but never sarcasm or teasing. Gentle humor, right? Like you did, not in your heart.
Think lower.
Yes, yes. And girls, teach them about hormones, the process of menstruation, how to take care of that, breast growth, body hair, hygiene, all that. Boys, same hormones, sudden growth spurts, maybe for both boys and girls. Coordination problems, maybe for boys and girls. Frequent erections, wet dreams, vocal changes, like the cracking voice, right? And facial and body hair and hygiene again, right? All of that. All right, so that's up to 12. Now we've got our teenagers, our 12 to 18-year-olds. And again, sooner is better than later. Don't wait till they're 17, right? So this is third base from the waist down. So girls, we need to teach them about sexual anatomy. Again, the difference between a clitoris, the labia, a vulva, a vagina, ovaries, all the things, right? Teach them that menstruation is God's way of preparing the body for reproduction, or nature's way, if that's more your language. Teach them about pads and tampons. And actually now we have more options than that, but teach them about all of that. Teach them about toxic shock syndrome. If they don't take care of their tampons, they can get very, very sick and possibly die. So they need to know that. And then teach, yes, even your girls, about masturbation. What is it? Why would it happen? Is it okay? Is it not okay? Again, these are per your values and your education level. in terms of science, religiosity, spirituality, whatever you want to incorporate in that. Okay. Boys, again, also teach sexual anatomy, the penis, erections, the testes, the scrotum. Teach them about jock straps and athletic cups. Why do we use those? My boys all took Taekwondo. From a very young age, they were using cups, right? um, Teach them about wet dreams and erections. Again, part of God's way or nature's way of preparing the body for reproduction. And teach them about masturbation. What is it? Why does it happen? Is it okay? Is it not okay? When is it okay? When is it not okay? I love this. Years and years ago, I had a client who was a newly single dad. He'd been married and had 4 kids. And we were kind of, trading stories, war stories about raising boys because he had all boys. And we were talking about this, about, you know, teaching our kids about sex. And he said the best thing, and I just loved it. I said, I'm totally stealing that from you. But he said, I just teach my boys that if you play with it too much, you'll break it. And I'm like, okay, you're not wrong, right? And we actually do know that porn induced, or actually porn and masturbation induced erectile dysfunction is a real medical problem now for 20 and 30-year-olds, not for 70-year-olds.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. This
Wow.
is in the last 20 years, you guys. 20 years ago, you never heard of a 30-year-old with an erectile dysfunction. It didn't happen unless it was a very
Wow.
rare condition, right? Again, 12 to 18 years old, continue to teach them about self-control and overcoming weaknesses and overcoming temptations and overcoming, drives and desires and all the things. It's just part of life.
Mm-hmm.
You're not special because you have to deal with this. You're just human, like all the rest of us. It is an expectation of adulthood to use some self-control. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
And then, especially if you're faith-based, teach them to have faith in the change and repentance process, however that looks for you. If they've done something that you've taught them is wrong, teach them that it's repairable, that it's fixable. It does not define who they are. Of course, we're going to make mistakes. Of course, we're going to make bad choices. And then there's a way to fix that. There's a way to repair that. It doesn't define you as a human being and you as a person. And then before dating, whatever age you decide is appropriate for that, they really need to know how to be friends with both boys and girls.
Yeah.
They can't go on dates if they don't know how to be friends with people. So that's really important. And then whatever your standards are, whatever your expectations are, whatever your suggestions are, please be overt with them. Teach them what those are. Don't expect they'll just have picked it up from you because they've never seen you, their parents, as teenagers.
Heaven forbid.
Yes, exactly. So if you don't teach them, they won't know. And then teach them what appropriate affection is. What is okay to do when you're dating? Is it okay to hold hands? Is it okay for him to put his arm around her? Is it okay to give a kiss on the cheek, on the forehead, on the mouth? At what point is it okay to do passionate kissing? And when would you not? And why would you not? Right? Again, where are those boundaries? Where are those lines? Is it okay to have sex before marriage or outside of marriage? Those are your values. That's what you're passing on to them, right? And again, define your terms. So sexual activity is anything that arouses sexual appetites, not just intercourse. So yes,
Wow.
brushing your girlfriend's hair might be a sexual activity if it's arousing to you or her, right? So yeah, we've got to define our terms.
Well, and I was thinking about this too because this is something that Joshua, my son who's 17 now, and I have talked in extent about is that we know where he knows where his boundaries are, but if we don't ever teach those boundaries, then it's, the little girlfriend's boundaries that become the standard and not, and it's going to be our family's boundaries are our family's boundaries,
Right. Right.
and so I've said to that, like, this is in the Daniels home, this is what we do and this is what we don't do, and here's the line, but now there's no ambiguity, there's no question. He knows where the boundaries are, and he doesn't want to get close to them,
Good.
but he loves dating, and
Yeah.
he loves having great experiences with lots of people.
That's awesome.
So anyway, I appreciate you sharing that, though,
Yeah.
that this is what our family does, and these are the expectations, and
Right. Yeah. And then
it needs to come from
it
us.
does. It needs to come from us, you guys. Absolutely. First story, be a journalist, get the story first, So, as far as defining terms too, Pornography, the actual definition is pictures or writing with the intent to arouse sexual feelings. That is what pornography is defined as. Pictures or writing, because it can be the written word, like 50 Shades of Grey, with the intent to arouse sexual feelings. That is its purpose. And again, maybe I'm being just a little bit too hard-nosed on this, but I don't think I am. If you look into the background of it, pornography is sexual slavery. There are very few consenting adults in that industry, very few. It's objectification and dehumanization of God's children. Okay.
Yeah. Well, especially when human trafficking is the number one exporter,
Right.
is humans, and that's what so many are forced to do.
Right. Right.
So,
Exactly. What else before dating? Teach them that home plate is sexual intercourse. And what are your values around that? What are your standards around that? Is that something that they want to engage in outside of a committed, perhaps married relationship? What are the risks of doing that? What are the pros and cons of doing that? You've got to have the conversation, right? Um, Remember, our teenagers are still in the very black and white thinking where they think it won't happen to me. It won't happen to me. It happens to my friends. It won't happen to me. So we have to teach them that it could happen to you. So, and then teach them what to expect early on. If you do get pregnant or if you get a girl pregnant, here's what you can expect from us as your parents, right? What's going to happen? Would we encourage you to put up for adoption? Would we encourage you to get married? Would we encourage you to keep it? What would we do? Right? What are our standards around that? What are our values around that? Let's see, I'm looking at this little quote here. Let me just read it. It says, making adult decisions, such as being sexual, requires adult actions, such as getting a job and supporting a family, or giving the baby up for adoption. Marry and provide a family. No more pursuit of, if you marry and provide a family at 17, you don't get to pursue your personal dreams anymore. The baby comes 1st, right? Or you can have family and your dreams if you wait. Okay.
I love that.
So just be really reality based, and then if your kids are like 25 and you've never had these conversations, maybe they're engaged, I don't know. Teach them something about what to expect the first time. The first time is not your best time. They should know that. So have some books on hand to offer. Again, Emily Nagoski is great. Let me see, who was it? Berman and Berman. So Laura Berman and I can't remember the other sister. They're sisters. One's an OBGYN and one's a psychologist. They've put out a number of books that cover the whole range of what to talk to your kids about and about sexuality. Talk to your kids about the importance of sex to the marriage for both of them, for both partners. Okay. Talk to them about desire and arousal differences. This is normal and it's something that every couple has to navigate. And then talk to them about male and female intimacy differences. What makes a man feel close? What makes a woman feel close and wanted and desired? It's different, right? And then talk about what real giving is, not just give to get or tit for tat or, strings attached kind of thing. Teach them what it means to be sexy, what it means to be intimate, right? They won't naturally know these things. And if they have to, again, go out and find out what it means, they might come home with really different ideas than what you would hope for them, right?
I remember right before I got married, my mom and all my sisters were like, "You need to read The Act of Marriage." And so I read the book and I was like, "Oh, but I'm so glad I did."
Yeah.
I'm so glad that I took the time to read that because there was stuff that my mom didn't cover or feel comfortable covering,
Mm-hmm.
which normally she had no issues with it, but I
Mm-hmm.
was so glad that I had read that before because it gave me some context with coming from a faith tradition. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, The Act of Marriage used to be the only book we had out there that was safe. And so we have
now
a
there's
lot more
more.
now. We have a lot more now. So thank goodness. But yeah, there's plenty of faith-based books. But again, line them up with what is the science also saying? Because science and faith don't always speak to each other. They really need to, but they don't always.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Emily Nagoski does a really great job of presenting the science in a very respectful way that I would have a hard time seeing it as in conflict with any faith tradition, really.
I love that.
Yeah.
And that's Come As You Are.
Come As You Are. She has a new one that I haven't read yet. It's called Coming Together or Come Together. And I'm like, oh, that's got to be another good one, but I haven't had a chance to read it. And then, yeah, there's several books out there on how to talk to your kids about sex. What's Happening to My Body book for boys, What's Happening to My Body book for girls. Kids Ask About Sex, Honest Answers for Every Age is another one. What's the Big Deal About Pornography, again, is Jill Manning, and it's a little paperback book. It's great for anybody. She actually wrote it for the internet generation, for youth.
Wow.
But it's very well done, and I think all of us as adults could benefit. Yeah.
And as I mentioned, I'll put links to all of these in the show notes. I found so there's a homeschool curriculum called The Good and the Beautiful. And I've used some of their stuff. I generally am a non-curriculum type of a person, but occasionally I'll use curriculum, and they put out a unit on maturation. And it does come from a Christian worldview.
Yeah.
But I really appreciated how it goes through the different anatomy. It goes, through the different things for boys and girls and the changes that will come. And it was reasonably priced. And so I have been using that for my kids. So there's that, The Good and the Beautiful maturation unit that they have about the body.
That's awesome.
So it's a good one. It's a good one.
Yeah, I think there really are a lot more resources than we think there are, because we get so nervous about looking for them. But if we poke our head out and we look around, there is some good information that's been generated out there. And again, filter it through your own value system. That's always going to be important, right? And then present it to your kids as well as you can. So, yeah.
I love it.
I will tell you. Okay, so here's my little bragging point, is that when my oldest got married and they were back from their honeymoon, and this is a few years ago, and they had just had their first sexual experiences with each other, and they came up and they said, "Can we talk to you and Dad?" And I said, "Of course." And they came in and closed the door, and I'm like, "Oh, it's going to be serious." And
it's one of those conversations.
Yeah, and they really had some very important questions about, well, what is this, and what happens when this, and this was our experience, and is that okay? And it was just such a point of pride for me that they would even feel like they could come talk to us, right? After all these years of investing into this topic, so that they would have a resource to go to and not just struggle on their own or struggle with sources that are going to cause harm, And so again, even as adults, they're still watching us. They're still hopefully relying on us for some good, accurate information and support and love and guidance and all the things. So
I love that.
Yeah. So that's everything I had kind of prepared in that little, believe it or not, we got through most of my slides. So that's awesome.
I love that. So. Last thoughts for these moms who are nervous and scared, and my listeners have the whole spectrum, from pulling their kids when they're little from the education system to pulling teenagers. Some have adult children already. What last words of advice that you'd give them?
Really when it comes to this topic, the most important thing is for us personally to educate ourselves. So many of us as adults are still not very well educated on our bodies and on intimacy and on sexuality and on, what's healthy and normal. And that's where it all starts, is foundationally, do I know the truth? Do I know the truth about this? Because if I don't know it, I can't teach it.
I love that. Thank you. Caralee, thank you so much for taking the time today out of your very, very, very busy schedule and client load. Thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome.
I will put everything in the show notes so that y'all can link to all of these great resources and educate ourselves. Mamas and papas, until next week, you got this. You're doing better than you think you are. We'll talk next week.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this today, please like and subscribe. You could also join our private Facebook group at School to Homeschool, or sign up for our newsletter at www.schooltohomeschool. Have a great day.